just finished 6 Records of a Floating Life by Shen. It's a very short book. It is kind of an autobiography of an 18th century man in China, which is a very interesting context for a Westerner like myself. But also, I found it not too difficult, but a lot of like the context, the cultural context, the linguistic context, names, places were all very over my head. It was a world that was very alien to me, and I found especially the last part very difficult to follow. Not difficult to follow, but not as engaging as someone who was way less ignorant than me of these things. But it's broken into 4 parts. It's very short. There was originally 6 parts written, but only 4 parts have survived. The first part is the joys of the wedding chamber, and that part is him talking about meeting his wife, Yoon, and sort of how they fell in love, and how they how they got married, and their sort of all of the things they did, and how it was very cute, like what do 18th century Chinese people do for fun? Well, they write poetry to each other. Not write it, but they would like recite. They'd have games where they'd sit and recite poetry or come up with poetry, and just speak it to one another, just rhyming couplets, and they'd paint together. And so this Shen Fu guy, he was a scholar, but he sort of failed the imperial examination, so he wasn't sort of upper well-to-do class, but he wasn't poor working class, obviously, because he could write. So he was just sort of this weird, I almost want to call it a middling sort, but I'm sure that's an anachronistic term. But he was a sort of a secretary, a very, very low-level bureaucrat. Not even bureaucrat. But he was also a painter and a poet. And I guess not really a poet. He appreciated poetry, and he would compose poetry during these like fun games with his wife. But I think he was more of a painter. He talks about painting a lot, and selling paintings to get by. And whenever he has friends over, he always describes them as, oh, this was the guy who was great at painting flowers, and then this guy was great at painting portraits, and this guy was really good at trees. And it's sort of, he had all these friends, and just everyone sort of painted. That was just sort of everyone's hobby. I guess hobbies were kind of, maybe not limited, but I guess poetry and painting were super popular hobbies in 18th century China among this class. And speaking of class, it is very strange, because he is more well off. He describes having servants and having people carrying him around and clean up after him and whatnot. Like he's not a servant class. He has servants. However, he is absolutely destitute numerous times through this book. Sometimes he'll have absolutely no money, and he'll have to pawn the clothes off his back to be able to get a drink, or to be able to travel somewhere that he needs to get to. Like, there are times when he has absolutely no money. And then there are other times, and these times when he doesn't have money, he often goes to people that are either related to him or are friends to him, or that he had lent money to, and then asks for money. So when he does have money, he's lending out money to people. It's a very strange system where people, I say strange, very different from the current system where people have money and people don't generally ask for money from others. But in this world, when you have money, you lend it out to others who need it. And when you don't have money, you go to others and ask for money. It's, I don't know, I find it very, very, very different. But yeah, the joys of the wedding chamber is the first section, and it's written from his perspective, and it is a patriarchal society, but it seems that his wife and him were actually really in love, and they were really like they were best friends, which doesn't often happen between married couples. And he even talks about how there were some things, like as a woman she had to sort of remain at home and she wasn't allowed to go out in public, wasn't allowed to experience these different things, but she really wanted to. So this one time they dress her up as a man and take her out to a temple or whatever so she can sort of see the world and see all these things, and he's totally okay with that, and he's like, it's a really beautiful love story. um, Part two is the pleasures of leisure, and that's he sort of talks about flower arrangements and how gardens should be set up, and how to sort of decorate, and I think he also talks a lot about drinking your games. So whenever they have a party, it's always a drinking game, and it usually involves poetry or literature or some sort of literary something. Um, yeah, that one was kind of neat. And then part three is the sorrows of misfortune, which depict his wife's declining health and their troubles with money and their troubles with their family. So it seems like his wife was like pretty clever and tried her best, but because of sort of errors and miscommunication with the family, his father began to assume things and like improprieties, and so he was sort of not excommunicated, exiled, I don't know, kicked out of the family, and he had to go far away. And they have kids. So Shen Fu and Yun, they have a daughter and a son, and they set up for their daughter to go into some other family and their son to get a job as a shop assistant or something, and then they go off and try and help his wife with her illness, and eventually she just ends up dying. It's really sad. I'm trying to find a line. There's this one line that this line. So his wife does end up dying. I think they're in their early 40s at this point. And they're exiled from the family, so he can't go back to his family. His children can't come see their dying mother. He's just sort of just him and her, and he dies. But he says, "Alas, Yoon came into this world a woman, but she had the feelings and abilities of a man." So I don't know if I want to take a modern potentially anachronistic term and be like, was she, or should I say he, trans? And it was just in that society that Yoon was never able to fully be themselves, or was it just that this is a very sexist society, and when he says she came into this world a woman, she had the feelings and abilities of a man. She wanted to do things as a woman that the society wouldn't let her because she was a woman. Not she wanted to be a man or she was a man, but she wanted to do things that only men were allowed to do. But I still think it's interesting that that line's in there. And then to make it worse, his 14-year-old son eventually dies after his wife dies. His father gets really sick, but he doesn't go home to his father because his father hasn't asked for him to come yet, and he's been exiled, sort of. So he's waiting, and then he gets news that his father had died, and then he rushes back, and he's like, "Why didn't I just come back? I was an awful son," and he feels really guilty about that. And there's some sort of an issue with his younger brother, because he is the oldest son, but I think his younger brother was like keeping information away from him so that the younger brother would inherit everything, and Shen Fu would not. But Shen Fu didn't really care about any of that. He's a very sort of, I don't know what to call him, but he just cares about art and beauty and poetry and love, and whatnot. So in the final part 4, the delights of roaming afar, talk about all the different jobs he's had and how they've allowed him to travel to different places. And like I said, this part was a lot of proper nouns, and some of it was interesting, but a lot of it was just naming places that he went to and describing them, and it was kind of all blurring together and difficult for me to parse. One of the sections, though, was talking about this sort of fleet of, I don't know the name, because in a European context you would call them prostitutes or like brothels or whatnot, but I think in a Chinese context those words have different connotations. Like they call them entertainers or sing-song girls, I believe is the term. But basically there's this fleet of boats that have these sort of older women that are in charge of a whole bunch of younger women, and men go there and pay for services of the women who drink with them, hang out with them, sing for them, and then sleep with them. And he describes being sort of living in this area for like a year for work while he's married, and it's totally fine. Like he talks about the other person he's with will sort of jump around and have a different girl every night, and sometimes a couple girls at the same time, and that's totally fine. But he sort of chooses this one girl that has the figure of his wife, he says, which is kind of strange to us. And doesn't fall in love with her, but says he has just a great time and he really enjoys his time with her. And at one point she sort of reveals that like it's really hard to be in her line of work. Like some of the men are very abusive, and even when she's sick or when she's not in the mood, or if her throat's sore, she still has to sing, she still has to pretend to be happy and laugh and smile, and she just like breaks down crying in front of him. And he treats her really well, and all of the other sort of girls on the other boats and are all really jealous of this one girl who gets treated very well by Shen Fu, and they all sort of love him. And it's like super positive, and he says something like, "The welcome I get there, you couldn't pay for 10,000 gold." So it's kind of a weird sort of wholesome, but yeah, monogamy I don't think is really, it wouldn't really make sense to them. Exclusivity in marriage, because there's another part in I think I can't remember which section it's in, but his wife wants to find him a concubine, just because it's the thing you do. Your husband gets a concubine, and if she really likes her husband, and her husband's her best friend, so she wants to get a really good concubine. So she does get this girl, which is like a really expensive girl, and they sort of get around the money issue by the wife and this girl becoming sworn sisters, is the translation, which I take it to mean they sort of agree to be really good friends or something. I don't know what it is, but anyways, she works really hard to get this girl to be her wife's concubine, and she's like really enjoys this girl's company as well, and is like sort of really good friends with her. But yeah, it's certainly an interesting context where sex is not something that is limited to a man and his wife. Although it seems to be that the woman can only have the one man. Again, patriarchal, sexist society, but it is sort of not even questioned that the man can have multiple sexual partners, and is kind of encouraged to. It's just sort of, it's not even something they think about. So that was interesting in that final section. But it's a really neat way to write an autobiography. Instead of chronologically, he has 6 records, 4 of which survive. So sort of breaking it down, telling the story of his love, then telling the story of his hobbies, and going through them chronologically. And there is overlap between them, but I think it would be neat that if for whatever reason I ever wrote an autobiography to do something like that, like write about all your relationships, and then write about all of your education, and write about all of your jobs, and then write about, I don't know, just have different sections that go through different aspects of your life that sort of layer upon layer upon layer lead into weave into this full picture of who you were. So the title 6, so there's 6 records of a floating life. The floating life part comes from this Tang dynasty, which I think is like 600, 700, 800s poem from Li Po. On a banquet with my cousins on a spring night in the peach gardens. It says, now the heavens and earth are the hostels of creation, and time has seen a full 100 generations. Ah, this floating life like a dream, true happiness is so rare. There's some ellipses in there. They cut it a little bit. That's not as positive, but yeah, that was a very interesting look into life in the 18th century in China. Six Records of a Floating Life by Shen.